as we look at copyright more and more, and even intellectual property generally, right? We always see that when it comes to its interaction with technology, it's always a thing where how does the law engage with technology? What is happening exactly in that space, right? And how do technologists and people who work with technology, how do they engage with law? Especially in this case, our purposes, how do they engage with copyright law? Do they find that it restricts them, or do they find that it's helpful, to them in their work? And so that's what we wanted to unpack today. As copyright scholars, which you are, you already know that copyright operates in an environment of exclusivity, right? So you have a specified category of protected subject matter. So literary works, musical works, artistic works, sound recording, cinematography films, broadcast, etc., etc., right? And because you have those specified categories, you think about the length and breadth of life generally. People would sing, people would write, people would film things, and with the digital environment, it becomes even easier and faster to share, these things. So when copyright first started in the UK, as you claim, you will find that then it was more in response to people who were writing things by hand on paper, right? So you wanted to control for each kind of technology that will come up at that time. So you had the printing press, where you could now write by hand and then it's printed, and because of that, people are able to share. And then you start thinking, how do we protect people who are writing, and all those things. And then it came to the time when we started having photocopiers. It now became even easier for people to photocopy written text, music written on sheets, scripts for movies, and all that. And then we moved from all those photocopiers and scanners and all those things to now the internet, where you could download, upload at the speed of light, right? And now we've even moved further to the realm of artificial intelligence that has been with us for a long time, but now it's getting all the hype because there's more and more innovation happening in that space. And now the interaction with copyright protected works have now become a thing where copyright protected work now forms data that is used to drive AI innovation. And it's now that gap or that space in between to decide, this is the law that we have. These are the people who are working with things that are protected by that law. How is their interaction with that law? Is it difficult? Because if it's difficult, then it affects how innovation comes in that space. So with that said, we have, I'm not so good with South African names, so I'm going with Dr. Chidi. Because Chidi is Igbo. Is it Igbo also? Oh, okay, wow. Okay. Fantastic. So Chidi is like God is. That's what it is. I like it. So Chidi is a linguistic researcher. He's a multilingual writer. You're supposed to be clapping. Yes, and a literary curator. She is an Eleanor Ostrom and Chevening Claw Fellowships alumni. She's also a full staff member in the Department of African Languages and a research fellow at the Data Science for Social Impact, which is a research group that sees navigates environment. And then you have Prof Vukosi Marivate, who heads the Data Science for Social Impact group. He's also UP AFSA Data Science Chair, and he's also the founding director of African Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. He wears many hats. so I'm not going to be able to cover them. But he's here today wearing the hat that is never off, which is the hat of a data scientist that works with data. And at every point in time, looking at how can we use data for social impact. So how can we use data to solve the problems and the challenges of our world, and how can we move from always solving problems to enjoying this life that we have, right? So welcome, Vukosi, and welcome. All the people clapping are, are our postgraduate students in the law faculty in the Masters in Intellectual Property Law program, and they have become copyright experts because of the fact that they've gone through the program so far, but also because they've been the ones working with on the MIT big data science program, compiling the data from the parliamentary submissions and working with students. So welcome everyone. So we're going to just start, and what we want to do is, I think I'll start with you because it is also a newly minted doctorate degree holder. So, when you think about the PhD program, I don't know who designed it, but that person really came up with an excruciating process, because you don't come out of it the way you went in. Mm-hmm. So anywhere you see a PhD holder, like they say they will say in Nigeria, they will say anywhere you see a PhD holder, you should just squeeze $1,000 in the person's hand. Just say, manage it. Because they've been through the most. But we'll start to talk about, let's start with you just walking us through, you've done several projects that involves, data science, and then especially in your area as a linguist. So just walk us through a specific project you've led or you've contributed to, and just share what was the project about, what did it aim to achieve, and then
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you guys for warm welcome. So the project I'm going to speak about is really a new project that I started, that they brought me to lead the project. It's a project we're trying to we are focusing on developing machine translation playbook tailored for African languages. So our point of departure was African languages, for the fact that they're African languages, they are technically low-resource languages because there's data access to work with, right? So we are still so I started last month, we are still in the early stages of the project at the moment. So we are planning our data collection, our literature review, and our goal is to have to co-create ethical pathways of working. We want to collect data. We're going to work a lot with indigenous communities. Mm-hmm. We're going to work a lot with people in the African natural language processing who have been working with data a lot. And maybe now, what is my involvement in the project? I came with no background of data science, right? Mm-hmm. But I come a lot with my extensive experience as a linguist. Mm-hmm. And now what I'm doing is more like I watch the gate in terms of how data scientists are engaged with African languages, mm-hmm. right? Because we are trying to avoid data scientists having a conversations with themselves about languages not involving linguists. So we're looking at ways of inclusivity, which is, if you look at our prime purpose is social impact. So we cannot have a social impact that is exclusive of other groups. Mm-hmm. Hence, so we're also trying to have data scientists not have African languages as a niche that is only profitable for them, right? Mm-hmm. So our aim is also to like gather grassroots communities, civil organizations, and speak with people who use those languages every day. My third question is I was asking Idris, I was like, but if you guys are doing these projects, this big, brilliant project, who is it for? Who is your end user? Who do you think about? Hence, I'm saying we cannot risk data scientists speaking amongst themselves and not speaking out loud. With can we make data science accessible enough so that even a lay person on the street understand what is this about? Especially if you're going to say we are speaking or we are preserving African languages, we're giving African languages digital preservation, but African language speakers are not involved there. So, like from the onset, we did have copyright considerations, and we are aware that some materials we are going to use may not have clearly defined copyrights, especially if we're going to speak with rural communities. People, how do they protect? And now the copyright issue is now us not using those communities as data sources, but as active participants in our processes. And so we are prioritizing community-owned open access data sets and working on informed consent protocols that clarify that ownership of usage. As part of the stages, obviously we had to apply for ethical clearance, right? And we've had back and forth, like, you apply for this clearance, it doesn't come. They say, oh no, we have a consent issue, or use this, so those were the experiences we had with copyrights at the moment. But at least these are things that are appearing at the very beginning of the project, which makes it easier
to address. So I think I will take from that to then ask those African language experts, linguists, and who would then work with you, with the community.
In this question, I think that question actually causes me partly to reflect to, I think it was maybe the second Hanzula workshop we actually held in here, almost 3 years back now. And in that workshop, one of the challenges we had was, for example, a community, in this case, a community of people who speak Kilubedu. So for context, Kilubedu is a language in Limpopo. It's in some ways what happened is that when there was stratification of languages in the country, which was done through the apartheid government, it was, okay, people who live in this area, you now all speak only this language. Right? It doesn't matter what your language was before, it just, this is the language of this area, so it all falls under there. But then you can have Sikulana, you can have Kilubedu, you can have all these languages that are there, that those communities see themselves as having an individual culture, an individual language, but then as per the instruments that the country gives them, they were kind of erased, right? So now, a number of young people from this community, they come and say, we've spent the last few years building a dictionary, a bilingual dictionary for Kilubedu. We would like to provide it to the workshop participants as something that we can use as a shared task. In our area in computing, we like shared tasks where we can go in and say that, one of the things we can do is maybe, given that we've got a bilingual dictionary, one of the things we can do is try and build a translation system that's machine translation or an AI-driven machine translation system. But then I got stuck. I will say it's me, because now I sat there and I was like, oh man, who did you get this data from? Who was collecting? Do they understand that at the end of the day, this is now going to be a digital infrastructure that you're giving to researchers like ourselves? Have they given permission for us to look at? Because it's a great gift. Like, people don't, like, for me, every time we interact with language content, it's like, this is a gift you're being given from different communities, and you have to kind of treat them with respect. And now we're stuck. We ended up not using that data. We ended up saying, like, we can't give this to the participants, and then people spend enough time in thinking, what can they be doing with the data? Because, yes, issues with informed consent, issues with, how is it being shared? Because even then, I think their community didn't understand what we meant in this way of like, okay, is this you're saying we can use it, you can reshare it without engaging with you? And they say like, no, you can just use, like, it's exactly like, no, but then we also want to protect your rights. right, in this space. And these are things that come in and sometimes come up against the, what do I call it? It's not an efficiency, but convenience of I can just take the data, run it through my models, do something with it, and then get a result. I don't really care about what that data actually represents. And this has been, I'll pick on Idris again. You picked, so Idris couldn't be here. He's having a small emergency. Everything is fine. It's just that he had to quickly rush somewhere. And one of the things that happened because of this is that, yes, there's this part of the convenience, and I'm going to say convenience even though it's an inconvenience of African languages are dying. We have 3,000 languages on the continent. Right? Only a few of them are at the top. They will have resources that maybe they can make it to kind of like, the next century. But then a lot of them are going to start disappearing from use. Even if you have millions of people who speak the language, it's just going to kind of go away. So now, the urgency because of that is you're trying to find as much data as possible and do stuff with it. At the same time, you're hitting, if you are observant, against this part of like, but where's this data from? Who does it represent? And what were the expectations of the people who created that content? Over and over again. And this is a big challenge at the moment with AI in general. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, openly always is saying, no. These things should just be openly. Why the heck are we then talking about copyright law? We need to build this all-knowing machine, and we need to feed this all-knowing machine with as much data as possible. We will deal with the copyright thing later. Right? And to declare we get funding from OpenAI, just nothing. But this is a major challenge. Right? Because now there's this thing of like, no, the convenient thing to do is just to say we suspend thinking about IP and copyright because we need to feed these things. And it's a major thing even in the US now that I think they were trying. I think they fired the head librarian of the Library of Congress in trying to see if they could actually, Elon Musk in this case, in trying to see if they can kind of almost get to a point where I guess it's what is it? What's the thing? The concept again? The fair dealing part. That the fair dealing part can be suspended from being enforced. Right? Because XAI on Elon Musk's side, OpenAI on Sam Altman's side, they just want to get access. But then we're still going like, who does the data represent? What were their expectations? And it's not like, I remember Idris, like, that's what we were talking about. And he, like, I could see him going through his mind, is like, wait, so we can't just speed through these things. You need to stop and then think about these spaces. And it's a thing that I can tell you, not many data science or AI researchers think about. It just thinks like, oh, I got the thing. And then I go, I'm not like, the people who work in companies, there's a lot of other lawyers who are there who tell them, no, stop, don't do this. But it's not the data scientists typically who are the ones who are stopping. They're just thinking, I've got the content, use the content.
So obviously now we have like two perspectives, like looking at it from a linguist perspective, where you sort of like start to see yourself as a representative of the African community, as it were, the indigenous communities, the people that are native speakers of the language. And then you also look at it from the perspective of you also being personally invested in it as well, because you are African, because you would belong to one of those communities by birth, by reason of being there, or by being reason of being African. And so you're then thinking about how do we protect the interests of the community, the interest of the culture, in terms of like, this is who we are, this is our identity, as a people, as Africans, and how do we make sure that is reflected, appropriately in whatever project that is going on. And then you have from the data science side, where there's, let me say, a growing consciousness about how, the fact that you're not just working with machines, it's about the humans behind, the machines, in the sense that this is not just data. This is something that represents a people, a culture, and you're thinking, what is the best way to make sure that I'm working ethically in a way that makes sense? And so maybe from the data science side, it's more like something that is a growing thing, especially as we then, look at it from the perspective of, oh, we know that languages are dying, African languages are not being represented, on the technology side. So there's that eagerness, enthusiasm to, to come in that space and be included. But you then start asking yourself, how, do you get included in a way that doesn't come back, to bite you? So copyright law is, let me say, one tool, right, for addressing these issues about informed consent, about protection of culture. But it's also, I don't know what to use, but let me say it can also be problematic in the sense that we still do need this data. It's just now how. So I guess my question then, my follow-on question to both of you would then be, how is the current operation of copyright law in this space? How is it useful or not useful to the work that you do as a linguist in this, whole data, science and data collection space? And then I will come to you because you also, from that data science space.
Yeah. I wouldn't answer specifically, but I'll just give a general response to say, I think copyright is useful because we do not want to find ourselves in situations where we are victimizing communities we're working with, right, for that reason. And yeah, for me, with us, I think we are also anticipating a challenge that we're going to work with a lot of unpublished texts or like a lot of unpublished data, and that problematizes how then who owns this,
Yeah.
But I think copyright, by virtue of it giving the right of ownership to the right people, I think that is useful, and it also informs us in terms of are we working ethically, because whether we have the verge or the eagerness to collect this data, what it can do for us, we still need to respect other people, especially marginalized communities, African communities. So for that virtue, I think it is useful. Yeah. And I will just go to the point of how now data scientists have, I'm not accusing anyone, it's just me reading the papers to say, oh my goodness, hello, this is like a niche, It's like people have really made it a niche, and it brings problems of cultural nuances, that because what we do as in the DSI, we have like human validation points, where let's say data was collected, we still involve humans to validate the data to make sure does this sound like a human being speaking, or does this sound like a machine, Would a human being say this, maybe it's a suit or something like that. So we still this is us also merging humanities and sciences, and this is us being interdisciplinary, involving people like me to speak in. So for that, I think.
What's your?
Yeah, okay, for the benefit of the room, it's like the reason I started with the bigger players and explaining that is that now we can go down to the local ecosystems, which much smaller players, right? So there's a tension in different spaces. So we're going to go back to my favorite topic, which is the SABC, because one of the places that you're going to see this tension really playing itself out is how the SABC sees itself for the last 30 years or so. So I think they just, I think the group CEO just put out a statement that they're not a going concern, and the current model that they have, which everybody's been telling them for years that it doesn't make any sense, it won't work, right? For them to be profitable, and they won't, which I don't know if you heard this, they won't meet their public mandate. That was literally the statement. Right? That's what they're literally saying, like, oh, the way that we are put together as a company, which is the SABC, how we collect money comes from the TV licenses, and then we have to go make most of our money through advertising. It actually won't work for us because we now can't meet the public mandate, which is not the thing that their lawyers would say. But anyway, that's what this group CEO said, I think, to Parliament this week. Now, why is the SABC important? So now I'm sitting as an innovator. I'm at Lilaba AI. We are a for-profit company, and we're trying to build tools, for example, in speech recognition, in translation, that can be used. You can now, in the future, phone your insurance company, phone the mobile network, and then you're just told you can interact in whatever South African language that you want. You can just start. The thing just works. That's where we want to get to. Then you think about, if you want to do work for these systems to work well, I need a large data set that I can train these systems to do well. The largest archive we have probably in the country, connected to my first story. Remember, I said that the apartheid government said, let's put these languages and put them in boxes, and then that's what it is. The other thing that they did with the previous SABC was then say there will be a radio station for each of these languages. Right? Part of this actually is divide and conquer. If you can get people to have this cultural identity that others other people, and then you can give them their own thing, it makes it easier to give them fun to start. All right. So all of this is that we're now modern SABC radio stations for every language. If you think about the archives, going back how many decades, it's a massive data set. But they do not have any easy way. And when I say easy, it's just a clear process to say, if you're a researcher in a university and you're interested in doing this, this is how you access our things. If you are a company that wants to use this for things, this is how you would access our things. If you're doing it maybe for public benefit, yes, you can use like something that's close to fair use, but then you can't sell on. If you're not, then you must then go into contract. None of that is clear. And the reason that the SABC at the moment is getting worse and worse and them trying to stonewall people from getting into these things is because now they are identifying that the rest of kind of the space at the moment when it comes to AI, people are figuring out how to make money out of this content, and we can't. We don't have the capacity or the capability to do any of that. But on the other side, the same way as the languages are dying, the archives of the SABC are dying. So the way to explain this, which very few people in this room will get the cultural reference, but some will. There's a show that used to be on TV in the 90s as part of our movement called Japan. On TV. Japan. Used to be on Fridays, used to be the thing that you watch when you come back from school, and then it was the thing that basically said the weekend has begun. Generally used to be at 5 p.m. At 6 or 6:30 p.m. It was a music show. I think you can go watch some of the things. The main presenter who really made it famous is Vinoda Mashizo, and she passed on a few years back. When she passed on, the SABC used a pirated copy of her season 1 highlights, showing that they no longer have season 1. It has disappeared. They have season 2. You can go watch it on SABC Plus right now. Season 1 has gone. So this is a big indicator that the SABC doesn't have the capability, doesn't have the capacity, and at the same time, their content is disappearing. And IP sits all in the middle of that. And that's where we are, 2025. I'll share the video as a kind of like an internet story, and I talk about that specific show, Jam-X. And then they discussed this thing. For them, they were just talking about the archive disappearing, but for me, it's connected to so much of my own personal experience with the SABC. So another kind of piece of evidence that this is a
And,
yeah.
So it's like now on one hand copyright is useful as a tool to establish some sort of ownership over language data. And so if you look at it from the perspective of the indigenous communities themselves, it's a tool, it's useful as a tool. There are some scholars who are copyright scholars who say that copyright is not the right tool to use to assert ownership over, even things like language data, for example. And in their opinion, it's more a thing where, fine, I recognize, the need to bring in the communities. We recognize the need to ethically use data, including language data, and all that. But copyright is not the tool for it, and they provide, some reasons that make some sense when you look at it strictly from a copyright perspective, and I'll come to that shortly. And then you have, on the other hand, where copyright is being used as a tool to stop the progression, I would say, of African languages. So for me, then, it looks like it depends on whose hands the data sits with. And that should now then start informing how do we look at copyright law and how do we apply copyright law in different spaces. Because if you use copyright law as a tool to secure the rights of the owners of the language data, the native speakers, the people who are in those communities that you're working with, it makes sense to then say, how can we establish their exclusive rights over this data, and how can we make sure that those rights are protected? And copyright is one tool with which to do that, coupled with then playing around data protection, informed consent, and all that, which are not copyright issues, but are enabled, to make them happen also with copyright. And then you think about when the data is in the hands of a body or of an institution that is constitutionally mandated to serve the public interest, should they be using copyright as the tool to stop, the progression of the African language? And the answer should be no, right? Because then you start to think about Idris will come back. There was a project Idris was worked on with DSFSI in terms of legal summarization. So what he did there was, I'm on my own one day, and Idris reaches out and sends an email to say, we want to create legal summarization tool, right? And of course, for us, like this, yeah, right? For us as lawyers, we are comfortable reading, case law. It doesn't like, you have to read it anyway and find out, how you can use the case as support your next case or support whatever argument you're making. We're big on authority, right? But other people need to also know what the courts are saying on a given issue, right? So even if it's at the point where you are working one-on-one with a client, you want to be able to explain to the client what, in simple terms, what does this law require you to do, right? If people who are supposed to obey the law don't know what the law requires of them, then we're nowhere, right? So you need to inform people beyond even saying this is the law. Take COVID, for example. If you are telling people that there's lockdown, you have to explain, in a language that they would understand, that this is why we're doing this. Lockdown doesn't mean you can't do this. It means you should only do this, right? So you have to make all those, public health information and explain. So there's always that thing about disseminating, information in a way that is accessible, in a way that people can get it, right? So now you have this, all these court judgments and all this case law sitting with, in this case, the Supreme Court of Appeal. So he then, you know that if you go to like the Concord website, you will see that they always provide, most times they provide media summaries so that the media can accurately report on the judgment, so that they will not go there and say the court decided this is wonderful, and it's actually not what is in the judgment, right? So then he takes all those media summaries and all those case law, and then uses that to create a legal summarization tool, which is a great thing, right? And then he's now worried. These are literary works, right? Should I now approach the Supreme Court of Appeal to ask for permission or to ask for a material from the Supreme Court? Under copyright law, one of the exceptions is that court judgments, documents of an administrative nature, political speeches are not copyright protected. So you are free to use them. Now think about the scarcity, right, and the low resourcefulness of African languages in the whole AI space. It then tells you that when you have access to existing data in African languages, it helps every one of us, right? It's now again back to the question of who does it sit with and how should they make the decision about how to use copyright in that kind of environment. Should we be using copyright as a tool to emphasize exceptions and limitations as something that allows us access, or should we be using copyright as something that allows us to say no to access? And so at every point in time, it will always depend on who the data sits with. But for Idris's project, it was a thing where I could easily say, no, you're good to go because there's an exception that covers this kind of material. And then he goes through the project, completes the project. Now he wants to publish an article around releasing the data and doing the academic thing of publishing an article. Then the journal comes back to say, but when you go to the Supreme Court of Appeal website, there's a copyright notice. There's that C in a circle sign. So how are we sure that you shouldn't have gotten copyright protection, a license to make use of the materials from the Supreme Court of Appeal website? And then Idris is now worried because now does it mean that you have to go to them and ask for permission when you've already used? Now you have to go to them. If they say no, does it then mean that you can't move, forward? And then so it was a thing where he now came back and said, what happens now? And I said, no, your response is in section 12, subsection 8 of the Copyright Act, where it's explicitly provides that there's no copyright in court judgments and documents of an administrative nature. So he then uses that response, and the data is published. The tool is available. Everyone can use it. So it's now then how do we make use of copyright in spaces that make sense? And so as we want to now start thinking about things from a solution perspective, I will then say, okay, when it comes to protecting the community, the interest of the community as one source of living data, as it were, because these are people who can speak to those languages. What role should copyright play, and how should it play the role? And I'm going to put on top of that question. I'll put on top of that question the license that we worked on at Data Science Lab with the Melissa from CIPIT in Strathmore University in Kenya, where we now have a license that, and we talked about the license in class, right? When we were talking about copyright licenses, and I shared this Noodle license that tries to make copyright works openly available, in this case data sets that are African data sets or African language data sets. you want to make it open, but you're using a license where you're saying you can use these data sets for any purpose. If you're from a developing country, you don't have to pay for it. You don't have to do anything other than if you create a work of adaptation with the data set, which would then be if you create a legal summarization tool, for example, if you create a translation tool, if you create a chatbot, whatever, that you do around it using that data set, you're supposed to share alike with users from developing countries. And then for users from developed countries, you are required to provide a benefit, something in exchange to the African community, whether it's the language community or the data community, which would be people like those who are working with African language data, and then which would also be people that are also for the African people and African language and African culture. So you have to do that balance. So if you then have that kind of license, right, and you are working with an SABC, would that be a license that they should be using to open up access to African language data? Bearing in mind, so you and I know that part of their thing is how can we enjoy some commercial benefits from providing access to this archive, because it's looking to them like everybody wants it.
Yeah.
So how do we get something out of it? So what do you think about that kind of license in like from an SABC perspective? And then I'll come to you, Dr. Chidi, in terms of what do you think about that kind of license as a way to protect or address some of the issues that you've seen with data scientists working on African languages and that their niche, kind of thing. Yeah.
Sure. This a very interesting time at the moment because on the other side, we're again for the benefit of the class in the background. A lot of the communities are moving away from CCBY, right? So before, if you're working in the area, not on the side of the SABC, we create these language resources, and then what would happen is that because you want them to be open and for other researchers to especially get access, you would just release it under CCBY. The challenge came in, well, now for the last few years or so, is because to build many of these AI systems requires so many resources that data itself is no longer enough. So you need data plus compute plus the know-how, the capability, and those costs are things that are becoming more and more intractable, especially in developing countries. So in terms of now using, in this case, the license again as another way to balance these power dynamics, you should not take it for granted that now another big tech, Mark Zuckerberg comes, again, we're sponsored by all of these companies. Mark Zuckerberg comes, but then this is more again from the academic freedom here. Mark Zuckerberg comes and says, no, you have OpenAI, you have ChatGPT, you have Google, you have Gemini, all those things, and then says, no, we are releasing Llama and Llama is free. And we are for open source, open weight models, even though they don't share their data and don't give it and all those parts. In that, no, what is happening is that they're trying to then show you that we can play in this space where we're trying to get everybody to release their data openly. We know you do not have the capacity and the capability to actually turn it into the tools. And that's the thing we're now asking countries to do. But literally, it's getting to the level of countries of saying, can you be more that you're releasing your language data or any other part of data that is useful for AI in almost close to CC0 as possible. Right? Because it will lead to innovation. But then what they're not saying is that you can't innovate. Because you're not going to have the scientists, you're not going to have the computing power to actually do that.
Yeah.
These spaces. And that's where the part of now, again, how do you balance these different things. We had to, I sit on the steering committee of the Kuna Fund, which funds the creation of data for, especially in the global south, for AI. And we used to require CCBY. And now, over the last 2 years or so, there's a huge debate internally of saying the researchers are telling us that they don't want to use CCBY. Why? They release the data, they don't have to compute. Very soon, a big tech company take the data, create the tool, and then all of us just remember the big tech company. We don't even acknowledge who was creating the resource for the capability to even be available that is used by society. And at the same time, we don't control then how this technology is used also in our communities. So that's why on one part. So through that, I think, yes, the SABC should look at saying that why don't just have a default license that makes it that it gives as much permissive coverage as possible, while at the same time reserving their access to benefit. Instead of first saying we're closed, where we don't even know what they have. Right? And there's no other place, because there are other actors that could be coming in and saying that, oh, for TV programs, we can actually mirror whatever they share and just keep their license under something like CCBY or Noodle, as it were, because we are just sharing in the same way. We're just finding a format that then becomes easier for our intended audience. Remember also, audiences matter. There might be something I'm creating because it's going to be ingested by a computer, and there are other things that I create because they're going to be ingested by humans. I'm sort of using that word, but I'm used by humans. Right, we're doing this right now with terminology lists that are coming from the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. Yes, on one side, these terminology lists, there might be ones for law, for all those things that are multilingual in our country. On one part, we want them that computers can use them, because now if I'm building a tool that can do legal summarization, you want it to also know and try to know how you can translate from one language to another and keep the legalese. Right? But at the same time, if you're a legal scholar, you might want to have access to the same thing because you write. And then as you're writing, you're trying to say, no, I'm trying to write something in Sepedi and all those things. I want to be able to get access to this file. The thing that is good for the machine is not necessarily good for the human. The thing that's good for the human is not necessarily good for us. So we might do that transformation and still keep the license as if it's something like Sherlock. Right, and make it available easily for people to be able to. And we do that a lot. There's a lot of these things where we just make them available and do these simple transformation because we believe that in the downstream they're useful to other people and all those things. And yes, we're also thinking about our communities, not just ours, but we believe other communities will use this. And we hope that the people who use them will keep the same spirit going forward. At the same time, Lilaba had on in the space, so our essay2 paper just got accepted today. We published this morning, early this morning, 2 in the morning. So we had ACL, one of the big computational linguistics conferences. There, you might say that, no, I still also want to have a geographic difference, but I want to allow that for the people who might be African in this case, who want to use this data and still get a benefit, it's okay. Just take the data, go get your benefit. We don't need to take a cut, or we don't need to figure out what the benefit back is going to be. But anybody outside the African continent, they can only use non-commercial. And then if they want to use commercial, they must then get into a special license. But all of these are options in the spectrum. Right? Depending on what you expect of them. On the Lapa side, it might be that we're saying like, oh, we want to make sure that the African ecosystem in AI moves towards thriving. So we just want the innovators out there who can figure out how to make money out of the tools that they build from this data to go on and do it. And not have to come back to us and say the benefit. But then with Noodle, you might say like, no, but we want also to be a spirit of sharing. You see, these are all options and it's not one or the other. It just depends on what you're trying to do. And yes, maybe SABC to then say like, what is it that we want?
Beyond just looking at it for like, we have a cash cow in the data that we have, because at every point in time you also have to look at purpose and intended,
Yeah.
right? There was, I think I shared with the class. There was a case in the Netherlands some years ago where their sort of like their company registry had this data, huge database, because they were interacting with the public. People were filing, to register new companies, trademarks, all those sort of things. And because it was a public service, that data is available. So you can go on the website and just even do a preliminary search to be able to decide whether you can go ahead with this company name, or not. And then there was a company that took from that database and made it, did the company things to it in terms of making it more user friendly, faster search results, all those sort of things, and they were selling it for a service. And so the company registry, the national company registry, now sued them for copyright infringement on the database. But the court said, there's nothing that you can do about it, because you can't stop the service, you can't close off the database, because this is a public service you're rendering. That is your statutory mandate. So you're just going to swallow it, you're going to sit with it, and that was what happened. And so you think about that when you think about, public bodies that have this, large number of data sets that are useful and that needs to be opened up. And secondly, like you rightly mentioned, there's no infrastructure for them to continue to store them, for them to continue to make them useful. One of the things that came up with us doing the work with the MIT students was that we were just looking at a small subset of parliamentary submissions. So you're doing a copyright reform in the country, and you put out a call for public, comment.
Yeah.
So different bodies, including big tech and small tech and little tech and everybody, we are, making submissions to parliament. But there's even no system whatsoever of collating these comments to be able to say, in our copyright space in this country, this is the preponderance of evidence in terms of who is for what and how should we be balancing interests here. Even with blind essay, which is the popular case now when it comes to copyright reform and the use of exceptions and all that. One of the things that the High Court mentioned when it was time to give judgment, to decide for blind essay and all that, was that the court said, I don't even see before me any society of authors or composers or the people whose direct rights are affected are not even in court. Yeah. And sometimes it's because they don't know, what is going on. So you have that on one hand, and then you have the local communities that you want to address. What do you think that should be the way that you can use copyright law from your own perspective? What do you think is the way that copyright law should be applied in a way that protects the community but also supports innovation?
Yeah. I will just give you a very brief short answer. I just think that it should maybe have clearer, more flexible guidelines, that allows, like flexibility allows a balance in such cases. Maybe we shouldn't have like, oh, this is, you do this, or, let us have an alternative ways of looking at things. And maybe we should have it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all thing. Perhaps let's have a case by case. What is the need here? What is the purpose here?
Yeah.
Maybe that should be an approach here.
Yeah. So we're now going to wrap up, and I'll ask you, both of you, to speak to more to the work that you do and how you think the copyright law, especially, but law broadly, can better support innovation in your respective spaces. But I think now more and more, I think law should be accessible. to the people who are working with these languages, people who are working with these technologies, in a way that allows them to ask the right questions. But I will leave it to you to wrap up. Well, how do you think, as a linguist, as a scholar in African language, now working with data science and data sciences, how do you think the law can best sort of, beyond just having, you say there's a copyright act, they start voting sections and things. In practical terms, how do you think, what would the law, legal research, legal scholars, what would they do, and your life would be easier?
Yeah, I think it's also a question of awareness. As you say, most people don't even know like copyrights. If you don't know what is copyright, what is patent or intellectual property, you don't even know that maybe you are breaking a law. So maybe we can just kind of educate the community, and perhaps we should have more scholars writing in relation to copyrights, making it accessible, interpreting it, like what we are doing in the project that I'm working with. We are trying to say we are interpreting data science into an accessible language, which is why they brought someone like me who would speak in a writer's language, in a creative language. So, which is what the DFSI is trying to do, to say what is inclusivity, what is spaces for access for different people. So I think we just need more awareness, we just need these conversations, and we need to kind of provoke each other, but in a good way. And there's a writer and a publisher. You probably know her. Her name is Vivi. She's a founder of Cassava Press Republic. Yeah. She likes to say she beefs, but she beefs constructively. So perhaps we should have this constructive beefs around what is copyright, and what is copyright maybe for South Africa, what is copyright for Africa in general. Maybe also we should start creating awareness about what does it mean for us? Is it for us? Does it work for us? Yeah. Maybe those are the conversations that we need to have.
I think I agree completely about people understanding what actually IP and copyright, how it interacts with us. It's amazing. Yeah, like for me, it's a lived experience on a daily basis. I remember during COVID, UP still hosts the only repository in the country where you can get day-to-day COVID data from 2020, 2021, 2022 in terms of the cases that day, what happened. There's no place in the country where you find it. It comes from our lab. During that period, I think it's under CCBYSA. Yeah, it's under CCBYSA. Randomly, people were finding my phone number. I was literally getting called. Hey, Vukosi, we represent X organization, and can you change the license on your data set? This data set was created by 70 volunteers. Literally waking up early in the morning or sleeping late at night to collate all of this information for free. Nobody got paid, none of us expected any money. But because we knew that this was going to be something that's very useful for researchers who later will try to understand what happened in South Africa. At the same time, during that time, people wanted to make decisions. I would talk to municipalities, literally, I'll talk to municipalities during that time about data flows and how and they would come back to me and ask and say, do you have our data? Do you understand what the question is? We've collected data, we've registered today, these many people got COVID. We sent it to National Health, but we don't know what our situation actually is. Because all we are required to do is send data. That way, we don't get back any information. And they were asking us as an open, we're like, no, we wait for whatever as a public verifiable source, those things. And they were like, we can't make decisions. Tshwane had an outbreak in old age homes. Killed lots of people. Durban, an Edgar hospital, got infection. Killed lots of people. All of these things we were seeing after the fact when they broke a scandal. But I can tell you, people during that time couldn't see what was going on. Even in 2025, I do not believe there's a hospital CEO at a public hospital in South Africa who, after being at the job for 3 hours, they got in at 7 and it's 10 a.m., knows what's happening in their hospital. It'll take so much to convince me. And this all goes back to this data thing. And now you have these people calling us and saying, can you please change the license? Why? They were sitting there ready to say, if you change it into something like a CCBY or something like that, I can go and sell this to the government.
Back to the same government who released the data in the first place.
Because I can create a little tool, it does nothing. It just shows your data. We didn't do any work. And now I can go sell at disaster management. I can go sell to this hospital. I can go sell. So this shows you, like, again, this part of how complicated this thing is, but that it must be on what is it that you're trying to do. And in that case, I reviewed, I got hate mail. I think I probably still have emails during that period. Why CCBYSA? Because we're going to create this thing, and then now I'm going to sell it. And now you're going to show up and say, well, you're making money out of this thing. Yeah. So anyway, those are again of like, we need people to learn, but at the same time, we must, yes. For us, it was not, we were trying to maximize access and maximize that people can work for the common good. While, yes, at the same time, which is, I think, evidence, I'm sorry, I think it's something, again, I'm very passionate about. It's evidence right now by all the court cases and the SIU judgments that are happening right now against many, many entrepreneurs who, during a time of crisis, were just there to say, how can I make a quick buck? It wasn't about the health of South Africans. Just look at the SIU and check the judgments that they're getting that are connected to COVID, even in 2025. Right? And we were just in between. We didn't know. We just thought, like, yeah, let's do CCBYSA because we just want as many scientists to be able to engage and then we work together. But then on the other side, we didn't know that there was, like, a whole set of other people. Yeah.
So those are things.
Yeah.
So I think so in closing,
yeah.
I think that it then tells us that licensing is unfortunately much more complex than it should be. And it's now a question of figuring out what kind of license makes sense for each kind of situation. I've been talking to people from Ken Covers, and one of the things that I keep getting is a question of, okay, what if I want some commercial use? And so it even beholds on us as legal scholars to then start thinking about, there's this thing about openness, there's also this thing about proprietary, closed kind of approach or system. And you have to then figure out for each given situation what makes the most sense. But I will stop here and say thank you so much for making the time to come, for being open in terms of sharing your work and how the law interfaces and interact with your work, and for making the time to come today to share your experiences and to speak with us. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
I just have one. With the interaction regarding the communities and development of this language, we need to also appreciate the fact that in as much as the language is deteriorating, there's also new dialects that are being developed. Take, for instance, somebody who is in Soweto that speak Zulu in Soweto won't be the same as a person in KZN. So are those, in as much as we're trying to preserve something that was patriarchy in the olden times, for instance, the court system, tribal court system versus the court system that we now enjoy, there's still that cap that whatever it is that you're doing should be constitutionally recognized. So in your adaptation of these old languages and methods and the manner in which they did or they lived their lives. Is that in the linguistic side a consideration of looking at the old languages and how they live their lives, modernizing it, because at some point I would come and challenge that in a manner that we didn't speak like this in the olden times. So how do you come across and pass those challenges so that when I review that or my grandmother reviews that, she says, that's not how we spoke? Because many times I would ask a certain things and they say, we didn't do it this way. This is not what it meant. So how would you get that to educate this generation and the future generation in collecting these data science, data of information?
Thank you. Oh, that's a complicated question, very tricky, because language is developing and there's no way that you can say maybe someone who say speak Tsotidan or speak Dori. You cannot say, oh, this is not a language, and at what point do we then standardize that, or how do we standardize the Zulu in Soweto or the Zulu in Pretoria? It's Zulu, So I think it's a question of representation. We have to represent. It's a question of representation and identity. And to be honest with you, I think we did not think that far about it to say, okay, we're going to have actually. So because we chose languages in this playbook that we're going to do, we have to choose like 20 languages. Firstly, our coordinator was like, let's choose Niger Congo languages, and we were like to him, but it's a problem for us, especially as South Africans, if we are going to work on a big language book that doesn't represent South Africa or Southern Africa in general, right? Then we had to have a literature review to say which languages have they actually been worked with using Masakan NLP resources, and we just found we try to have languages that represent different parts of Africa, but the language that we actually chose for Southern Africa, surprisingly we thought it's going to be Zulu, or because I speak Sepedi, I also thought Sepedi was going to be there, but the language that came was Xitsonga, which in Mozambique is Sichanga, right? And this is also a language that is spoken in Swaziland, and actually it was the first time discovery for me to say, oh my goodness. So now we ask ourselves questions again, because this is something that is spoken in Mpumalanga, let's say Bushbuckridge, or the one that is spoken in Giyani, or the one that is spoken in Pretoria. It's not the same, So then what do we say? That's a question. It's coming to me now to say, then we're having this language that is representing Southern Africa. Is it upon me or upon this project to say, now this is the standardization? Then that's where the question of flexibility comes to question, to say, at the disposal, this is what we had, this is the data that we have, and we're not saying by any measure that this is the standard, but this is the set that we have, and this is what we work with, and we are open to accept or to learn from what other regions or dialects are using here.
So this is the open beefing.
Yes.
So the open beefing in this area is that it took a very long time for me personally to start being invited to linguistics conferences. And one of the reasons this was is because I would meet linguists and they would come to me and say like, but the thing that you're doing is not pure Setswana. What are you doing anyway, all of this thing? You're creating a mess. And then some will come and say, the things that you guys are doing is not doing pure Setswana. And then for us, we're like, okay, we meet language where it is.
Yes.
Not what we want it to be. We can't. We cannot direct necessarily where I cannot prod and say like, I'm trying to move society towards this version of this or this version of this. So for a long time, I would find out, like, you hear these things, there's always close beefing. People then saying, like, yo, at the linguistic conference, people are talking about you and you're messing things up. You're messing things up. And I'm like, no. And so then I found a way to, I think it was 2 years ago,
at the linguistics conference. I'm trying to remember what the name is. There's a lot of them. Yeah. Alasa.
Yeah.
To get invited, forced by the way, to get invited and give the closing keynote. Specifically to make the case and say, like, guys, there's a revolution that is coming. And everybody sitting there and saying that they just want purity is going to be a problem. On the practical side, you're going to be poor during a gold rush. Right now, there's an AI gold rush that is primarily driven by language. And I am telling you, you now can go look around at linguistics department, African languages department throughout the whole continent, and they are not engaged. And it completely boggles. Like, if you just look at it from outside, you guys are not linguists, you're not big. You sit there and you're like, wait, so all of this stuff we're hearing now is language. Where are the linguists?
Yeah.
Where are the language specialists? At the same time, yes, it is important for me as I'm writing a paper and things like that to explain the things I was able to get come from this version of the language, from this place and things like that, because I also still need to be respectful. The language is not just the ones and zeros, it's not just the data, it represents many things, and I really should be very clear about what I am able to do and what I'm not able to do. And that still requires me to engage with the linguists. And it's a major tension within, and in the same way, I think it also still comes back to IP and copyright, because I engage with linguistic scholars who say, no, I do not want to release persona non grata in the linguistics, because I just release. We get something, we prepare it, and very quickly it's out there, we move on to the next thing. And people are like, what the heck are you doing?
And there are unwritten laws, that are just there and solve these situations of capitalism, and you ask yourself, why are we even doing this, Yeah.
I think
that's a whole other.
I think that one of the ways for this kind of situation as well, one of the ways that the law, including copyright law and IP broadly, can assist is to keep providing, more and more guidelines, codes of conduct, codes of practice. Because because he knows, we always do this thing where he's like, we want to put this disclaimer. And this is, I always come back and say, what do you want it to achieve? What are you looking to address? Because then I can, with my knowledge of the law, I can then say, you have to cover so and so and so basis in your disclaimer to say, you can use to this extent. So licensing is not even only just about you saying use or don't use, pay money or don't pay money. It's also about you being careful about how much liability you take on with whatever you're putting out in terms of the accuracy, the source, and because if you then are able to say, I can only vouch for the data set as is, but whatever you make of it is not on me. You need to be clear about that, because you don't want a situation where if your data set is now used in a particular space and something bad happens, it then comes back to you that it's because you release. And some government bodies, especially in the health sector, that's their reason for saying no, because they are like, we don't want anything to happen, and then it will come back that we were the data source, and we are now bearing liability. So there's that, and then there's also the aspect of then making sure that we provide more guidelines, not just to say a student or a research assistant has copyright in this or they don't have copyright in that, but to continue to clarify issues around authorship and who has done enough to be able to be considered an author and all that, and to make sure that the platforms that we are publishing and representing also has clarity in those kinds of policies, so that people are protected without them having to even face the battle in the first place. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.